Hey, Vlad here, devinsidey.com. Welcome to another video. In the previous video, we learned a little about Git and GitHub. We even went ahead and created our GitHub organization, which is a total overkill for a tutorial like this. Then we went ahead and we created two repositories, and now it's time to get them onto our local computer. Let's get right to it. Now, a long time ago, I made a somewhat controversial video in which I recommended the best operating system for developers. The TLDR is that I said that most of them are pretty much the same these days. There is a reason why I said it. There's a tiny caveat to this, and the thing is that I simply wanted the people to avoid procrastinating and learning about systems like Linux instead of actually going and learning programming. And so it's sort of like when people make a New Year's resolution to start running, and then they spend like the first week picking out the running shoes instead of actually going for a run. For historical reasons, as you have seen in the previous video and also in this one, I have always been a Windows user. Not because I like it, it just kind of happened. That said, since around 2013, anything even remotely related to software development, I have been running inside of Ubuntu, usually inside of virtual machines, and these days I switched to WSL2, which is the Windows subsystem for Linux, which allows you to run Linux inside of Windows. I have two awesome videos about it. You might want to check them out. And so for our use case, here's what we're going to do. If you're on Linux or on Mac, then just stick to it. If you're on Windows, I'm going to show you how to install Git from scratch, also how to generate your SSH keys and how to add them to GitHub. But apart from that, the rest of the series we're going to spend inside of WSL2. In fact, we're going to create an entirely new distribution from scratch. It's going to be Ubuntu 2004, and we're going to stay there. One last thing before we start, there are many ways to look at Git, and one of those angles is to look at it as if it was a database. In fact, multiple databases. Every repository is its own database. And so the same as with databases, there are multiple ways to interact with it. The basic one is you have some sort of client, which is usually a command line interface or a CLI, but you also have a lot of dedicated additional, graphical user interface tools. For example, in Git, you have things that, show you the history lines, or that, help you to resolve merge conflicts, and then also obviously your editors, your IDEs. For the rest of the series, we're going to use VS Code because these days it's the most popular IDE or editor, and this is also the one that I use professionally at work. So so we're going to stick to VS Code and a little bit of Vim. And by the way, if you're interested in learning Vim, even though I'm not an expert, I highly recommend you to start using Vim with Git, right? Because it's it's a very, very soft introduction, right? So you don't have to be there all the time. Just occasionally you kind of like hop into Vim, interact with Git a little bit, and then you hop out of it. Okay, I'm going to show you how to configure VS Code to use as Git editor, but then we're going to switch it to Vim. All right, so let's get our hands dirty. So I'm going to open my browser, and which contains the two tabs from the previous video. Remember, this was the first repository. This is the second one. So we're going to go to git-scm.com. Like this. We're gonna click on this button, download 229.2 for Windows. Gonna wait a bit. It's only 46 megabytes, so it's gonna take just a couple of seconds. Gonna click over here. I'm also going to minimize the browser, and once it finishes downloading, it should just open the installer, and we're gonna go through it. Now, usually the installation for Git is quite simple on Linux. On Mac, it's like literally one command, but on Windows, you have so many options. All right, so this is very, very small. I'm gonna zoom in and post, so we're just gonna click next. The folder already exists. You want to install that folder anyway? No, in fact, I was preparing for this video, so I'm just gonna go there, and I'm gonna make sure that it's gone. Yes, come on, yes, continue. Go. There we go. So we're just gonna click next over here. All of this I'm going to leave as a default. Maybe also check daily for Git for Windows updates. Very important if you're planning to stick to Windows instead of using something awesome like WSL2. I highly recommend you to check out the Git Bash, and also I highly recommend you to have this integration Git Bash here, right? So you will be able to right-click on a directory which is a Git repository, and you will say Git Bash here, and what it will do is it will start a terminal, and this terminal will be prepared to work with Git much better. It's going to show you more things. It's going to be more interactive and fun. Okay, so we're going to say next. Yeah, sure, group next. All right. So over here it asks which editor we want to use. You can use Vim, the ubiquitous text editor, blah blah blah. Vim is the default editor for Git for Windows, blah blah blah, for historical reasons. In any case, I already have VS Code installed, so we're just gonna go and pick VS Code over here. Okay. I highly recommend you that if you're a beginner to all of this stuff, use the editor that you're used to using. If you're using Sublime, use Sublime. Okay. So we're gonna use VS Code. I'm gonna say next. All right, adjusting the name of the initial branch in the new repository. So this is the thing that I mentioned in the previous video. It used to be masters. Now we can choose main. Okay, let's just behave and choose main. All right, over here, adjusting your path environment. Okay, so use Git for Git Bash only. No, that's probably too much. With this option, you're going to be able to use Git from any terminal you choose and also from a Git Bash, which I highly recommend for this particular use case. Or you can basically go like all in, and I don't recommend this one. Okay, so this one is recommended. This is the one that we're going to stick to. All right, choose the SSH executable. I never used Tortoise Blink, and this seems to be the default. So anytime you're in doubt, just stick to the defaults. Okay. Same thing over here, HTTPS transport backend, OpenSSL, fine. Yes, just say next. Line ending conversions. All right. So one of the differences between Windows and other operating systems is the character that is used to denote the ending of a line. The Unix and Mac systems, they use only carriage return, and I believe Windows also use the feed return. And over here you can configure how you want to basically the conversions, as it says over here. Okay, so usually like all the servers and most developers on Linux, on Mac, so the one that is recommended is this one. You check them out Windows style, because you're in Windows style, right? Which means all the line endings will be converted to the Windows ones, but whenever you commit them as if they were Unix style. Okay, there are also like many ways to add these conversions to local clients as well, so it doesn't really matter, but I recommend you to choose this one. All right, let's go next. Okay, so use the min_tty or the default console window. I recommend to use the min_tty because it's already like configured. Everything is going to work out, really nicely. But you can still use your terminal as well. Okay. All right, choose the default behavior for Git pull. We're going to talk about this a couple of videos from now, but we're going to pick rebase, and I'm going to explain why a couple of videos from now. So we're going to do next. All right, so there are two ways to authenticate yourself against GitHub. One is with your username and password, and the other one is with SSH keys. We're going to do both, and we're going to learn a little bit about SSH keys today. But if you're using HTTPS, then I highly recommend you to check out this Git credential manager that will remember the password for your for your username and password. Okay, so we're just going to do this. All right. File systems caching, not sure. Enable symbolic links. Yeah, so symbolic links are much more powerful on Linux systems and on Mac than they are in Windows. So just enable this. Okay. Next, support for pseudo. No, this is experimental. No. Okay. Install. All right. Finally, we arrived at the install button. I'm going to click next. It actually takes quite a bit. I have an SSD, but it takes like what, 10 seconds or so. All right, so now we can view the release notes. We don't want to do this, and we can actually also launch Git Bash. So Git Bash is an application that was installed on your system. By default, the font is going to be much smaller. Okay, so it launched the min_tty terminal, and inside of it, it runs a Git Bash, which is the shell. Right, so it's a different shell than the PowerShell or the Bash shell. It's the Git Bash shell. Okay, which means that it has a couple of extra features for you. Now, after a while, you will be able to search for it. So if you search for a Git Bash, now as of right now, it's not going to find anything, but it's just going to take some time for Windows to index the files, and then the next time you're going to be able to find it. I believe it's installed in C, Program Files, Git, and it's over here, Git Bash exe. All right. Okay, so now that we have it, we're in my home folder, okay, and this Git Bash thingy allows you to actually run Linuxy commands, for example, like ls, come on, ls, like this, right, or ll, okay, which will list things, okay. In fact, okay, I tried to press F11 to see if it would go into full screen, like this, ll. Okay, so I am in my home folder, and it is sort of a convention to create a dev folder. So I'm going to create a dev folder. Okay, make directory dev cd dev. There we go. Okay, so now there's nothing inside. Control L actually clears the screen. Nice. The first command that we're going to learn about is git clone. So we're going to do git clone, okay? And now we need some URLs. So we're going to go back to GitHub. Okay, so we're going to try to, we can close this one. We can try to clone this repository. So you click over here on code and you have three options: SSH, HTTPS, and the GitHub CLI. GitHub CLI is that video that I mentioned. It's the video that actually triggered this entire series. We're not going to talk about it in this video. So we're going to start with HTTPS. We're going to click this button, which is going to copy the URL into our clipboard. Very, very important on Windows terminals. I'm sort of used to pressing Control-Shift-V to paste, but if I do this, it will actually paste in some characters that are invisible to my eye, but they will be pasted in there instead of actually pasting the URL. So the way you paste is by right-clicking and, okay, it's Shift Insert for some reason, okay? So I'm going to do paste. Okay, so all I'm saying is that if you run this command and something goes wrong, chances are that you press something weird, and now something weird was pasted into the terminal. Okay, so I'm simply going to say enter. Okay, since now it's going to say cloning into repo second, and there we go. It just cloned it. This is actually not what I was hoping for it to happen. The thing is that I was preparing for this video, which is also one of the reasons why I don't record videos on Windows. I was preparing for this video, and the first thing that was happening here is that this Git credentials manager, it popped up and it went to GitHub and it did this OS2 dance where I logged in, and only then it allowed me to actually clone this repository. Okay, somehow over here it already knows that it's me. I have no idea where it is. I have no idea how to remove it. I tried to remove all of it before I started recording, but here we are. So usually what was supposed to happen was that a pop-up would pop up, and you would say, open with Chrome, and then Chrome would open. It would go to GitHub. It would ask you for permissions. You would log into GitHub, and then only then you will clone this repository. By the way, notice this .git thing. We're going to talk about it in probably a couple of videos from now. Okay, so now inside of the def directory, we actually have this repo second. Now I'm going to switch into this directory. I'm going to say change directory into repo second. And because this is git bash, you're going to have more information than usual. For example, I'm going to switch in there, and you're going to see over here main, because we're on the main branch, even though we didn't learn about branches just yet. In a regular, bash terminal, you're not going to see this. So usually the way you determine whether you're in a regular directory or you're in a Git repository is simply by writing ls. You're going to see, okay, there are these two files. ls-l is going to list them, and ls-al is going to show hidden files. Now on Linux and on Mac systems, hidden files are always starting with a dot. Okay, like over here, .git. Okay, so if your directory contains this .git directory inside of it, then you have a Git repository. Okay, now let's go back out real quick. I'm also going to show you the clone command again. So I'm going to go up like this, and I'm going to show you git clone. Okay, you can also rename the repository. Okay, so you can say alternative directory. Technically this doesn't rename the repository, it just clones it into a different directory. Okay, so I'm just going to do this. It's going to clone it again, and I'm going to have two directories over here, alternative directory and repo second. If I go into alternative directory, come on, no tab, are you serious? Oh, I made a mistake. Okay, all right, so as you can see, same thing is inside. Okay, so I'm going to go back out, and I'm actually going to remove it. RF, let's see if it's going to. Yeah, okay, it's gone. Nice. Another thing that I want to show you is git help. Okay, this is how it looks like. You can see help for all of these commands, and you can also do git help space some commands. So for now, the only command that we know is clone. So you can do git help clone like this. You scroll up a little bit. Ooh, look at this. It actually opened it in the browser because we're in Windows. Git clone, this is how it works. Like, this is a description. Clones a repository into a newly created directory, creates remote tracking branches, blah, 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 blah. You can read it on your own. These are all the options over here. Let me minimize it again. I want to see the terminal like this. Let me press Control L. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about SSH keys. Now, this is not going to be a full-blown SSH keys tutorial. This is just going to be a, mini crash course when it comes to SSH keys. Now, when we went to GitHub before over here and we said HTTPS, then the URL was pretty much exactly the same one as over here, and we authenticated ourselves with GitHub with our username and password, from the account that you created. I couldn't show this to you because, the credential manager remembered my my data, but still, okay? An alternative is to use SSH, and for this you would need to use SSH keys. Now the idea is that you generate two keys, they're always come in pairs, and for that you use a tool called ssh-keygen. Usually it's installed on Linux and Mac systems. On Windows you don't have it, but since we ran through the Git installation, it's very common to use SSH keys for Git. The installation wizard actually installed the ssh-keygen program for us. Again, they always come in pairs. One is the so-called public key, the other one is the private key. The public key you can show to anyone. In fact, this is the one that we're going to go and register with GitHub. The private key is the one that you should never ever show to anyone, because anyone with your key can basically act as you. The way this works is that GitHub would generate sort of like a question, and it would use the information from your public key to that question. And the way this question works is that the only way you can answer it is if you have access to your private key, which is why you should never ever show or give your private key to anyone. All right, let's go and generate them. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say ssh-key tab. And so as we can see, there is keygen and keyscan. Okay, so we need keygen. Okay, so we don't need the .exe. We can just leave it like this. All right. Now there are different types of SSH keys. The default type is the RSA key. Okay, so this is technically optional. This is what it would do by default. Okay, now we can choose the size of the key, and by default it's going to be 3072 bytes, which is more than enough these days. The thing is that you know, the bigger the key, the longer it takes to use it, and also it's technically more stuff to transfer. But we're talking about bits here, so we're going to go with a total overkill, and this is actually the number that I use for my own key. We're going to use 8 times 1024 bits, right, which is 8192 bits. Okay, so yeah, so this is the type, this is how many bits we're going to use, and we can also leave a comment, and usually the comment is going to be in the form of an email address. It doesn't even have to be a valid email address, but I'm going to say vlad@devinsideyou.com, like this. All right, so I'm just going to press enter. It's going to say generate in public and private RSA key pair. As always, they come in pairs. Okay, enter a file in which to save the key. I highly recommend you as a beginner to not change this. It should be stored in your home directory inside of the .ssh directory, and then it's going to be called ID underscore and then the type of the key, which is the RSA key. Okay, so I'm simply going to press enter. Okay, now enter a passphrase, and empty for no passphrase. Usually for the things that you're doing, you know, for the things that you want to do as like a regular person, and not just like some tool, you want to have a passphrase over here. And the passphrase is slightly different from a password in the sense that you can have spaces and it can be much longer. Okay, so I'm going to use the same passphrase as I use usually when I record tutorials. I'm actually not sure if I typed it correctly. I think I did it wrong. Okay, I did it right. Okay, so as you can see, it generated two keys. One, they're both in my .ssh directory. One is called ID underscore RSA, and the other one is called ID RSA.pub. Okay, now before I show them to you, or actually, we can actually go there real quick. Go back here, cd into SSH, and let's do explorer dot. There we go. Okay, so in my home directory, there's a .ssh, ID RSA pub. I'm going to double click on it. It actually spawned on my other terminal where I have Sublime Text with the script for this video. Okay, so I'm going to go into full screen, and I'm going to show you that, first of all, this is only one line. What's up with the menu? I don't want a menu. Okay, so this thing over here, I'm going to go to view and I'm going to disable word wrap, and you're going to see that this whole thing is one line. So this is the thing that we're going to copy to GitHub, which is why it's very, very important to copy it properly. So it always starts with SSH and then, you know, the type, and then there's a space, then this is the key, and it is very, very long. As you can see, it goes until, like over here, you see this is 1,396 characters long because we chose such a large number, and then space, and then the comment that we left. Okay, so this is the public key, and we're going to copy it in just a couple of seconds. Let's actually go over here, and usually you would never show the private key to anyone, but in this particular case, this is a tutorial, so I'm going to show this to you. So I'm going to go over here and just throw it in here. I'm going to do the same trick, view, word wrap. Okay, so maybe reduce the font a little bit. Okay, so this is how it looks like. It's very, very long. I'm going to go to the bottom, and at the bottom it says, and open SSH private key. Okay, now I'm not planning to stay with this key, but I have no idea how long it's going to take me to record this this entire series. So I'm actually going to close both of them, and I'm going to regenerate them. So I'm just going to go over here. And you can do this from any folder, by the way. I'm going to go and do exactly the same thing again. Generating the keys, enter, override yes, and I'm going to do the same thing like this, and like this. All right. Now, before we go and register this public key with GitHub, I'm actually going to show you an alternative type of the key, which is a bit more popular these days. But if you're trying to authenticate yourself against a legacy system, it might not work. It has to be a very, very old system, though. And this is the key that is based on elliptic curves. And so the type is not going to be RSA, it's going to be ED 25519. And one of the benefits of these elliptic keys is that they don't have to be so large. So you can go over here, you cannot specify an arbitrary number, only I believe 256, 384, and 512. So this is the one that we're going to use. Okay, the procedure is the same. You know, it's going to be saved over there, ID underscore the type. Okay, passphrase, it doesn't really matter because we're not going to use this key. Okay, and same passphrase again. All right, there we go. It generated it, so we can go over here and we're going to see them, right? So they look, it again spawned on my other screen. So they look very, very much the same, but you know, the type is different. And as you can see, like I zoomed in and the whole thing, you know, the whole thing fits into one because it's only 512 bits for the actual key. Okay, the private key would look the same. So let me close this one. I actually don't need these ones. I'm just going to delete them. All right, so let me open this one. Again, it's spawned on my other monitor. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing like this. Copy. Okay, I'm going to close this one. I'm going to go to GitHub and we're going to go into here and I'm going to open the settings over here. Right click, open new in new tab. So it opened over here and we're going to go over here to SSH and GPG keys, or you can go straight to github.com/settings/keys. All right, so this is the key for the Git tutorial. This is the one that I was playing with when I was preparing for this video, so I'm simply going to remove it. Okay, this is my real one, and again, like there's no issue with showing it to you because this is a public key. So I'm going to go and say new SSH key, and I'm going to call it somehow. So this is going to be get from 0 to hero. I'm not sure if you can use spaces. Okay, so it reminds you over here, you know, the key is the one that starts with SSH-RSA. So I'm going to paste it as a reminder. This is exactly how it starts. It looks like there's an empty line, but it's not. It's just a space. You know, don't try to change anything over here. Just copy it as is. Add SSH key. There we go. My password. I'm using a password manager. And there we go. And as you can see, it is never used. Okay, so now that we have it, we can go over here and we can go to code and we can say SSH, and the URL is going to look slightly different. So we're going to copy that. So we're going to go to the terminal over here. I'm going to go back to the dev directory. Okay, so right now we have the repo second over there. So I'm going to do the same thing as before. I'm going to do git clone, and this time I'm going to use this URL, paste. Okay, and we already have a directory like this, so I'm just gonna call it, I don't know, alternative directory 2, like this. All right, so I'm just gonna do this, and it's gonna say the authenticity of host can't be established. RSA key fingerprint is this. Are you sure you want to continue connecting? Now this happens every time you connect to some server for the very first time. Okay, so the next time it's gonna compare the IPs, and if they're the same, it's gonna be fine. Okay, this time we're just going to say yes. Okay, and now we have to enter the passphrase for the key, right? So we have to unlock the private key. So I'm going to enter my password. There we go, and now it cloned the repository the same way. Okay, we're going to learn about this pretty much at the end of this video actually, but let me actually show you this to you real quick. So we go to repo second, for example, and I'm going to say git remote like this. It's going to say origin. We're going to talk about origin in just a couple of seconds. This is essentially just a reference to the GitHub repository. Okay, so if you do git remote -v, then you're actually going to see that this is the origin, https:// right? So it will know that forever from now on, whenever you're working with this copy, you're going to authenticate yourself against GitHub with your username and password. However, if you go into this one, the alternative one, cd alternative directory like this, and we're going to do the same thing, git remote -v, we're going to see that it used the SSH keys. All right, so this finishes the installation on Windows, which was quite a bit involved actually, and also a tiny SSH tutorial. So for now, we're going to abandon everything on Windows except for the SSH keys because we already registered it on GitHub. So I'm simply going to copy, to copy the SSH keys over. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go and create an entire, a brand new WSL2 instance. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to minimize this, close this one as well. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch the Windows terminal. And I'm going to type in WSL-L-V. Over here, you see two of my distributions. If you have seen my WSL2 video, then you know that this is the one that I use to prepare my videos. This is just a workspace. This is the one that I usually use to record my videos. And now we're going to go and we're going to create a brand new one. Okay, so I'm going to type in exit. I'm going to go into the Windows Store and I'm going to type in WSL, press enter. I'm going to pick Ubuntu 2004 like this. The button is going to say launch even though I don't have it. This is actually the install button. I'm going to wait a couple of seconds even though it says that it will take a few minutes, but it won't. So I'm going to put my cursor over here. There we go. I'm going to say Vlad, some small password over here. All right, there we go. Exit. Okay. And I'm going to close this. I'm going to open the Windows terminal again. I'm going to do the same trick as I did before. As you can see, there's a new one over here and we can go into it. Ubuntu 20.4 and there we go. So right now we're in Ubuntu 20.4. The first thing that I always do is sudo apt update and sudo apt full upgrade y like this. Okay, so now it is going to simply update the system because you never know how old the images actually are. Let's see. Okay, so while it does that, I'm actually going to go over here and I'm going to go to gitscm.com. I'm going to show you that the version that we downloaded for Windows is 2.29.2. However, the one that is currently installed for Ubuntu, which is what I'm going to show you once it actually finishes downloading, is going to be a little bit older. And the reason is that it doesn't have the PPA, the repository from which it should download the latest version. In fact, I sort of gave up on these repositories a long time ago, and I created my own poor man's package manager. So if you go to install.devinsideyou.com, you will be redirected to my organization's GitHub profile, and it will search for install-repositories. And you can even search yourself by appending slash and then something like git. Okay, and so you're going to find these three, and you're going to find the install git. And the way all of my install scripts work is that you always just copy paste these two lines. They all of them work on Ubuntu. And the first line simply copies this, it downloads this script. The second line makes it executable and then runs it. In this particular case, it actually makes it executable as a sudo, which means that inside of the script, it probably uses sudo. So if you look inside of the script, actually all it does in this case, it simply adds this repository and then it installs git. And this is exactly the same thing as we're going to do over here. Okay, so now it finished. So if I do git version or hyphen version, there we go. Then we're going to see that it's 2.25.1, which is not 2.29.2. Okay, so if we run my script, or if we do, if we manually simply add this repository, I'm simply going to paste these two lines, press enter, and it didn't ask me for my password because I already entered it. There we go, it installed it, and now I'm going to do git version, and yeah, it already did it for me, git version 2.29.2. It's not like we really need the latest, but there are actually a couple of things that I want to show you in this new version. Not in this video though. Let me actually position this guy into a different virtual desktop so that I can have it in full screen like this, and then I can just go back like this to the browser and back like this. Okay. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to copy our SSH keys from Windows to here. And if I look into my home directory, then you will see that there is the .ssh directory doesn't even exist. Now the permission system on operating systems like Linux and Mac are a bit more involved than they are in Windows. And with SSH keys, you have to be very, very precise with the permissions for the .ssh directory and also for your keys. And so instead of creating a .ssh directory manually and opening myself for a possible mistake, I'm simply going to generate new SSH keys and then I'm simply going to remove them. Okay, so I'm simply going to do ssh-keygen, which is installed on Linux. Okay, so I'm just going to press enter a couple of times, no passphrase, no nothing, I don't really care. Okay, so as you can see, now there is a .ssh directory and its permissions are 700. Sometimes you can also use 600 if you're on systems with other people, and this way they will not even be able to change directory into your .ssh directory. Okay, so I'm going to go over here, cd.ssh I'm going to do LL. In fact, I'm going to do Control L and then LL. Okay, so you're going to see ID RSA and ID RSA.pub. The private key you can only read and write. You know, you're the only person, but the public key everybody can read, and you're the only one who can write. So I'm simply going to actually I can actually move from mount C users agile steel, which is my user .ssh, and then everything that is in there I'm simply going to move into this directory. Okay, so in Linux it's not going to ask me whether I want to override something or not. It did the override for me, but it ruined the permissions. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the permissions. So let's see, so we need, I think, so I'm going to do 600 for all of them. Okay, so it's going to give me this, so I can read write to all of them. And now I'm also going to do change mode. I'm going to do 644 for ID RSA dot pub. Okay, so it should be something like this. Okay, so your private key, you're the only person who can read and write. The public key, everybody can read, but you can also write. And we also copied the known host over. Yeah, you should be the only person who can read and write. All right, cool. So now we can go and we can create a dev directory. First, we need to make it and then cd dev like this. And now we can do the same thing as we did before, git clone. And we need to go and grab the one from here, ssh, like this, enter, there we go, enter the password, there we go. Right. So this is how you deal with SSH keys. You should always like carry them over from one computer to another. You know, every time you format, be careful not to lose them. Otherwise, there's no way to restore them. You will end up you'll have to regenerate them and register them again. Again, it's not a problem. It's just a bit inconvenient. As you have seen on GitHub, you can have multiple SSH keys. It's really not a big deal. Now the same thing as on Windows, you can do git help and you can do git help clone. In this case, it's not going to open the browser. It's going to open this default pager, which by default is less. You can go up and down with the arrow keys, and you can do Q to exit. You can also use J and K if you used to Vim. All right, so this is how you get some help. Now, over the course of this series, we're going to learn about a lot of Git commands, and one of them, which is usually not one of the first ones, is going to be the git fetch command. So I'm going to switch into this directory, and the reason I'm showing it to you is because usually on Linux, you have a built-in credentials manager for SSH keys that will remember your passphrase. So in this particular case, it asked me again, okay? So I'm going to git fetch again, and I know that I haven't even explained to you what fetch does just yet. I'm simply demonstrating that every time I do this, it will ask me to unlock my key. Now, git fetch simply gets the latest changes from the remote repository to yours. It doesn't change anything in yours, it just updates the local database, okay? Remember, inside of it there is this .git directory, which is the database that it uses. Okay. In fact, in some of the next videos, we're actually going to play around with some of these directories, but actually not many of them. You can spend years and never look inside of this directory. Right? So this is technically an implementation detail. All right. Now, because I'm using WSL, I actually don't have a credential manager like this. And if you have seen my WSL2 videos, you actually know that this is the case. Now, I don't want to waste too much time on this, but there is a very fast way for me to fix it. And so this is what I'm going to do real quick. I'm going to install keychain like this, and I'm going to go into my profile. I'm going to use Vim for this. And I'm going to go to the bottom, and I'm simply going to say, please, every time. So the profile is the file that is always loaded when the session is loaded. So I'm simply going to say, please launch keychain with these parameters, no GUI and quiet. Please go to my home folder, and inside of it, there's going to be a .ssh directory. And inside of it, there's going to be my private key. Okay, so now you're going to source in my home directory. There is a folder called .keychain, and please grab my host name, which is this, and use a -sh, not .sh, -sh. Okay, I'm going to escape, exit Vim, and here we are. So I need to go out and I need to go back in, and no such file or directory, which means I did something wrong. Let's check it out. Unknown option quiet. Okay, so I misspelled quiet. Okay, so we need to go over here, quiet, like this. All right, there we go. Exit, go back in. There we go. So now that I'm logging in, it asks me to open my key, to unlock my key. Okay, and now if I go into dev repo second, now if I do git fetch, it's simply going to fetch, right? It's not going to ask me for my key. I do it again, it doesn't ask me for my key. It's very convenient. If you have a regular Linux or Mac distributions, you're not going to be asked like this. Your credential manager is going to save it for an hour or maybe even for your entire session. All right, let me press Control L.